Thank you all for joining us to a little session we put together, which is really about innovation and innovating faster in what are clearly volatile times and increasingly volatile, but despite legacy. And we, between us, spent a lot of time trying to work out the right title for this because everyone wants to innovate faster and everyone's got legacy. So it was putting those 2 points together. And what today is about is trying to take you through three particular examples of work we've done where the theme throughout this is all about you've got some legacy, and the difference can be, in one case, it's an in-house built system. In two other cases, they're third-party ETRM, CTRMs. But it's where we were asked to help clients accelerate that rate of progress, that rate of innovation. But bearing in mind the legacy started to be that it was there from the beginning. In the case of the first example we're going to give you, that legacy wasn't necessarily expected to get deprecated completely, maybe partially. So it wasn't a case of kill the legacy with an entirely new system. It was work with that legacy and build a new system that satisfied the requirements of those stakeholders to handle greater volatility, to deliver, in this case, models at greater speed. But over time, because the new platform is more performant and does a lot that the old system didn't do, we are gradually replacing that old system. Whereas the other two examples we're going to talk about are ETRM, CTRMs, where there is no expectation of replacing the core system. It's about working with that system. But Stephen will go through some guidelines we've got around how you might build around those existing systems in a way that allows you to make changes more easily, more agile if you want to, more flexible, certainly more responsive. And in essence, that's about saying, well, rather than building customized functionality into an off-the-shelf product, which then hamstrings you when it comes to upgrades, why not just bring yourself back to the core of an ETRM that's more or less vanilla and out of the box, configured appropriately for your business, and then build an ecosystem of components around that, which will allow you to scale fast and yet to upgrade your core ETRM, CTRM. So we'll give you two examples of that. So that's what today's about. Just to introduce my colleagues around the table, I've got Mark Pickering. So Mark has been CIO, CTO for, amongst other places, Enron, the big E, EDF Trading and Shell. So Mark comes with many, many years of experience and always has a view on everything, and particularly this. And I love Mark's views on things like this. So Mark's going to give his 2 pennies worth on the context to all of this specifically. And then Stephen Ford, he's a senior delivery manager in our business. And Stephen's got lots of both financial markets and energy and commodities trading experience from development upwards. So many years ago was at Big Red, but has been with us for a good number of years and has worked on a lot of programs around change and transformation and innovation in energy traders, gas traders, where you're stuck with a legacy, and yet what they want us to deliver has been performance, often cloud-based new technology. And Stephen will talk through how we've done that. So he'll go through 5 innovation patterns and then talk the 3 different examples: superseding legacy, which was the first one of an organization that had a platform built in-house and how we've superseded that; the CTRM augmentation, giving traders insight into intraday exposure for a large commodities trader; and then ETRM abstraction, which is this flexible innovation layer integrated with ETRM. So Stephen will talk through those. Let's make this as interactive as you'd like it to be. So do feel free to leave your microphones on. Certainly have your cameras on if you're willing to do so. And ask questions as we go. You can either put them in the chat channel. If you're familiar with Zoom, you'll see the chat there. So just throw them down the chat line if you want to, and we'll try and answer them either as we go or pick them up on the Q&A. And if you want to ask questions verbally, please do feel free to do so. We've got time, so there is time for a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'll kick off. I'm Ian Murray, I'm the CEO and founder of Digiterre. And a little bit of introduction to us if you don't know us at all. Been around 22 years. We've worked with about 130 different clients across 4 main sectors or subsectors. So the first and perhaps the most pertinent today is energy and commodities trading. So you can see for yourself the organizations we work with. Many of those we've worked with over many years. So some as long as 20 years, some more like 10 or 8 years. And we're never retained. Most of the time it's trying to build solutions to problems that often fit in the camp of high risk, high profile or time constrained, using a combination of new technologies and new approaches and ways of working to solve those business problems fast. So we've got lots of domain knowledge in the energy commodities, more hard than soft commodities, but certainly energy and commodities trading space. The second big area for us is banking. So we work with a lot of the larger banks, as you can see, and a particular emphasis around two areas. One is FX, particularly FX overlay, hedging, and secondly, in the asset servicing side. So a lot of experience of helping organizations either build out technology for asset servicing, again, FX overlay type technology, or indeed developing architectures for integrating data from multiple core systems like fund accounting and custody type systems. So a lot of banking experience, and then a lot of investment management experience for buy-side, classic buy-side firms like Schroders and Merian. Man has been a client for probably 18 years or so, built stuff in the front office, in the post-trade environment. Again, a lot of it's centered around using data smartly, often working with legacy systems. And then the last are exchanges, clearing houses and brokers. So that's a little bit about who we are. In terms of what we do, we tend to build, not surprisingly, ground up technology, or it can be greenfield or brownfield, but it's really custom built. And it's very much about solving the client's business problems. So that's who we are. If you can roll on to the next slide, Stephen. I'm going to pass you over to Mark, who can give you a little bit of a context.
Oh, sorry.
I think someone else has joined us. Hi there. So over to Mark Pickering, who's going to give us some context to why we're here in the first place and why solving these sorts of problems, given the incumbency of legacy, is an interesting challenge to work on. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, sorry for the picture. It's just one that I've had in the drawer for a while. But I thought I'd just give a few reflections of what I've seen over the years. I've been around for quite a while now, as Ian alluded to, probably way too long. I started my career back in the 80s and working, basically developing derivative trading systems for the traders, mainly in the banking industry then. And then over my time, I've been CIO for Enron, for Shell Trading, for EDF Trading, and more recently, I've been consulting into numerous big players. Obviously, over that time, I've seen quite a lot of change in the industry. And my view on this, specifically around the ETRM side of things, is that when in the 90s, we used to, and probably the early 2000s, we tended to build most of our systems internally. At least we specifically did at Enron, which was a good case in point. And at that point, there weren't particularly many vendor solutions out there. So we spent a lot of our time looking at all the new solutions coming out, and then just cherry picking the nice sweet pieces that they'd built, and then just putting them into our own systems. And we did that for quite a few years. But over the years, the ETM providers provided better solutions, which I'm sure you've all seen, and that became the much better way of moving forward, which was the buy versus build. Build being pretty expensive, keeping teams around, etc. I think the trouble with that is that then over numerous years, these ETRM platforms have been highly customized using either the ETRM tools or some of your own your own in-house development. But they've become the kind of like legacy beasts in the organization, and it now seems to me that we need to find a way to either live with this legacy or kind of find a way out of it. And so there's numerous ways that we can go about these things. Obviously, there's a big bang approach of just getting rid of the whole thing, but that is hugely costly and very time consuming. And so what I like about the guys at Digiterre is they've come up. I started working with these guys at the beginning of the year mainly because I like the way they approach the problems around this space. They like to look at the complex areas, and they like to try and help companies basically peel back the functionality that is giving them grief within their ETRMs or any other products. I'm just using ETRMs as an example, and make it easier to use for maybe a longer time, but kind of like lifting yourself away from that problem and creating a better architected solution using the data modeling tools that we've got nowadays and the new technology stacks, and especially the cloud. It's becoming a good way of actually, solving these kind of legacy issues. So I'm going to hand over now to Steve, because Steve's going to actually talk through, how Digiterre have approached these sorts of problems and how you guys might be able to pick up on some of this. Over to you, Steve.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us today. And thanks, Ian and Mark, for the introduction. Really setting the scene. So, we're acknowledging that, we're bound to have legacy systems. We can't just ignore them. So how do you still innovate despite that? And, give yourself flexibility to upgrade with their upgrade path, particularly, and also build more interesting and maybe unique to your business scenario, your business strategy solutions. So I'm going to take you through a few patterns that we've extrapolated, and then I'll take you through the examples that Ian alluded to in his introduction. So the first one is freeing your data from those legacy ETRM systems. And, in the example we've got to come up as well, one of those systems was a legacy in-house build. Incredibly clever, but unfortunately became a bit of a black box as the person who designed and built it pretty much moved on, and not many people knew how to use it. But it also started getting in the way of the quants who had to, come up with the new models and actually innovate in their modeling. So we've provided a platform in that example, which has started small, solving one modeling type of aspect, and then built many more model types on top of it, which meant that as this evolves over time, eventually, as Ian said, it can therefore take more and more responsibility away from the the black box, rather difficult solution to iterate with. And we've moved them onto a new, more modern platform. In this example, actually using AWS infrastructure based on Azure DevOps to manage the versions of models. But the key thing here is freeing that data, because that data, as we all know, is very valuable, but only valuable if the right people see it at the right time, at the right levels. So one of our other examples is CTRM, where we managed to put on top of the CTRM data, and as trades would, move through their life cycle throughout the day, we would emit that data and provide a very quick, fast response to the traders to provide intraday exposure reporting. So really getting hold of your data, putting it into a more accessible place, and using modern tools and modern UI approaches and design really enables you to then iterate faster to drive that innovation. And as we know, what we need to see, we believe a lot of it agility. Clearly, we don't know what's going to happen in a year. We didn't know what was going to happen this year or last year, or the last few years. So the more agile you are, it's sort of common sense nowadays that you want to be fast on your feet to either take advantage of opportunities, minimize threats, and so on. So, again, getting that data out means that suddenly you're able to play and use that data and actually have your business expertise, whether they're or whoever, actually to see that data and make better decisions and guide your business. So business-friendly tooling, this was really interesting because we, as I said, unlocked from this black box, sort of modeling black box. We unlocked that black box. We created a new platform, and it's running in parallel. Ultimately, it will effectively take over or cannibalize all of the responsibilities this black box that really has met the end of the road. It's too complex. It would take almost a day or more for a quant to change a model, and it was very difficult to actually even trace all of the parameters and configuration and source data that had been configured in this modeling tool, trace it all through. So you couldn't really explain the results so easily, and versioning was not supported. So the new world, we basically pivoted towards the quant said, well, we know Python. So we thought, well, great. If you know Python, we can enable a platform, and we call it paved path. So they can use all of the complexity, if you like, behind the scenes. They don't need to worry about how the infrastructure is spun up. They can configure, how many or how complex the model is. So in the background, AWS can respond by scaling up in that beautiful cloud manner as much hardware as needed. So if you're going to run 10,000 Monte Carlo simulations, it can scale for that. So not only did the infrastructure provide the ability for quants to get through a lot more cycles and curves building and so on, but it means that they see the results more quickly, which means that they get feedback more quickly, so they become more agile themselves. So not only did we deliver the solution using sort of agile mindsets and methods, but it's now enabled the quants to so iterate on their own models using Python, language they're kind of very fluent with, and using Microsoft Azure in this instance, using to manage their versions of models, so they can have a very clear path of history. They get a lovely log of results tied to the model version, and then in the background, the paved path takes care of all of the complexity of scaling up infrastructure and so on. So again, we've got to say, I don't think technology is necessarily the barrier to innovation. It's how you put it together. And obviously, we used particularly senior and principal consultants on this particular piece because it's quite a complex almost concept to get, let alone then in the detail. So the technology isn't the problem, but when you get very skilled, very knowledgeable people who actually understand the business as well. So when the quants talk about the power ratings of various power stations, or maybe the cost of a kilowatt hour, they can respond and understand what they're talking about. Then we talk about enhancing that responsiveness with agility. So I didn't go far without mentioning agility, but here what we're talking about is by moving away from, acknowledge what the core system or the legacy system is good at. So whether it's an ETRM or CTRM, there are some fundamental value delivered by that package. But if you ring fence that and just say, right, that's as far as we're going to go with the ETRM or CTRM, we're not going to customize as has been or was done in the past, because we know that if we customize those solutions, suddenly when a new version comes out, it becomes either very expensive or very complicated to actually get back onto the upgrade path of that core system. So in this way, if we just put that in a box and say, right, that is the core ETRM, CTRM, we're going to make the data available outside of the box, and I've got some simple diagrams to illustrate. It's like called the donut. I think Ian termed this earlier today. But that donut diagram means you've got a core, you get the data out, you make it available through microservices, APIs, simple technology, but you're making that data available at the right timeframes. And then you can build your solution very quickly, and you can iterate with the users. It's not easy to get, Endor updated for your specific use case if you wanted to change a certain aspect, and obviously they have to think about all of their other clients as well. So in this way you build that sort of flexible layer around it where you can innovate, you can iterate and respond to the business impact or opportunities that you see for your business, rather than maybe the more average, because of these packages have to make everybody happy, and it's hard to do that. So again, you're going to iterate and learn much more quickly working with your traders directly around that. Moving on to subjects close to my heart, architect software for future change. So if ever you've worked with legacy code, sometimes it takes a lot of effort and cost and time to code because of the way it's been structured. So as we know, if you put in lots of libraries or dependencies and so on and so forth, if you change one small aspect of that, bloated piece of software, maybe it's a class that's doing too many things, it hasn't had separation of concerns, and it's kind of to practice, and everybody would nod and say yes, but we see often more often than we would like to, where people have kind of become a bit lazy and they thought the quick path will be the easy path. But if you do that, you're locking yourself out of future change, or certainly making it a lot more expensive. So keeping your classes, keep your particular services, responsible for one thing and one thing only. And then in the background also, you're architecting because you're having a deep and extensive automated test layer, so that you are actually saving yourself and providing yourself a safety net of regression tests in the future. That again supports that agility. That means that if you do change something because maybe a business need has required that change, you've got a safety net in place to catch you, and you don't fall far, or you don't feel long, or you can release more quickly with that. So really, I think again this speaks to, you need experienced people, because a graduate coming straight out maybe wouldn't have that knowledge, but working with some experience, they can pick it up more quickly. And then when you do need to change, because you're always going to change. I remember a client once said, I think it was an RFP, they talked about creating a system that will be, good for the next decade. And I think we'd lie if we said we can build UX and that will work next decade without any change. The best thing I think we can do is to be honest about it and let's architect it so that when change inevitably arrives, you are ready to extend and evolve to meet the need. And I think that's a more honest conversation around future change. Then our fifth one here is really taking care about user experience, UX, because your users do. If you're a trader, I've not been a trader, but I've seen how I've worked with them for many, many years. And there's a lot of information that they have to consume, interpret, and make decisions upon. And if you, I won't name the CTRM we were working with, but the reporting interface that they had to work with was appalling. And it had, probably nearly, 50 to 60 fields just splattered onto a screen. And every time they wanted to run to see what their portfolio intraday exposure was, it might take 10, 20, and even 30 minutes in some cases to run. And while it was doing that, it was slowing down the transactions of the trades being booked and so on in the core CTRM. So again, caring about their UX kind of was manifested by us, again, taking a feed from the CTRM via an API. We cached that data. We then had various aggregations and pivots applied to it. And then a very nice React front end in this example, could be Angular, could be Vue, many other technologies. But the most important thing was that view would sit on the trader's desk and actually be updated dynamically, and it would glow, simple things, simple UX little techniques. But, if a number changed, it would glow. So you could watch it change, and you could also snapshot, and then you'd get a warning if you were working with a snapshot that data's come in and your view's now stale. So they wouldn't have to necessarily refresh it straight away, but when they were ready, they could then refresh it. So it was really enhancing or augmenting that CTRM. And we know how successful, products such as Apple's suite are, because they take a lot of pride and effort around the UX, the user experience, even from when you unbox of an iPhone, I remember, and most phones now copy it. But the quality of the user interface was so important to them, and it improves the way we work with it. And as we know, most of our children can pick up an iPhone and work with it very easily from the first day. So there's a few patterns here. I would say the common element is conversation and people, and close collaboration between the business, who really want the benefit of technology, and let's face it, most of our business is technology these days, but keeping that communication going back and forth is so important, because that way you learn faster, you get to know what does work for the trader perhaps and what doesn't work, or perhaps the quant found it difficult to work in this way with the the versioning system or whatever it may be, and you can plan that for the next sprint. We typically, we don't mandate it, but we typically work in 2-week sprints. We tend to gives enough kind of momentum and cadence, but also enables you to be able to respond and change. One of the key things on that, actually, while I have you here, is when you speak about agile, there's no point doing a year of sprints if you're not releasing to production. You want to see that business value landing in production. That minimizes the backlog of risk that you're building up as well, of course. Okay, so now we're going to dive into, if any questions, do remember we're open to any questions, challenges, maybe examples of your own that you can maybe share with everybody. Please feel free to interrupt.
And Stephen, on that point, it might be worth asking, are there any questions on this so far? Any thoughts, ideas? No? Okay, well, we'll roll on. We'll start with the next one, which is the first example of superseding legacy effectively. And you'll notice it has at the top the word paved paths, so Steve could explain why, but really what we're talking about here is superseding an existing working system that did many good things for a long time, but was most certainly legacy from a technology perspective. Stephen will talk through how we have continued to help the client move from that to something much faster and delivered an initial working platform in 3 months. Stephen.
Absolutely. And that fast that fast delivery is really important because we were talking about a whole platform to optimize their models. So basically, obviously optimizing their assets through their models. So we were building a platform and the infrastructure, and as Ian mentioned, so we the result was that they can now evolve their models 6 times and more faster. So previously they were really being hamstrung by, if they had an idea for a model, and these are very highly skilled mathematical quants, and they couldn't just explore and test out that model in a kind of structured way with safety. They it would take them a lot of time, and as we all know, if you're waiting for a PC or a laptop to just respond, sometimes your thoughts move on faster than you've actually prepared. And then to talk to the terminology that Ian alluded to, paved paths. So really this is about making it easier for the quants to get to where they want to go. So the idea of paved paths is that you are effectively hiding the complexity, as I mentioned with the first slide. So they don't have to worry about any of the infrastructure on which their models run. They don't have to worry about how many CPUs or how much memory you're going to assign to it. We have various configurations in files, and they can basically talk the language of their models and talk the language of their asset optimization algorithms, and that will then be interpreted in the platform to spin up the right amount of infrastructure and so on. And again, it's important when we think about cloud, especially think about the cloud economics. So in this project, for example, we were very sensitive to the fact that if we spun up a lot of hardware, we need to then close it down, switch it off, stop paying for it, including in the development and test environment. So, otherwise you can have services running in the background all day when you really weren't using them. So again, it's being really, really aware of what you're working with, how the technologies work, and building that into your solution. But one of the best things about, and I think one of the success factors for this particular example, was the fact that they recognized the problem they had, because they could see the legacy system was slowing them down. And they also, when they realized that, they also worked very closely with the project. So we had 2 particular quants working with the project, and they continue to today. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but they were very much involved with prioritizing, understanding the agile methods, which they weren't aware of or hadn't really worked with in the past. And it's a very happy project because the business can share their concerns, the team listen, and they'll see it within a couple of iterations or however long it takes to build it out, and they see real progress. And that, as I mentioned just earlier, it's about getting that release out there. So to Ian's point, we were releasing very early, and by month 3, they actually had the first model running in the new infrastructure, and then it's improved and evolved and matured through time from that point. So before I move on, I'll just say, anybody, any hands up or any questions? Happy to go into that. Otherwise, I'll move on to example 2. No questions. So with example 2, so this was really augmenting the CTRM. As I mentioned, the CTRM did many good things, but what it couldn't really do was report very well. And in particular, the intraday exposure was an area, especially with the increasing volatility that Ian mentioned earlier. So, you've got your core ETRM in this little circle here. We put a layer of APIs and microservices around, improving some that existed, but some of it improved. And then we had this data aggregation, enrichment, and caching layer. And that resulted in the traders having very flexible reporting options. So we were really surfacing the life cycle or the life cycle events from the trades quickly out of the CTRM. That was the key. So obviously, I know at end of day, obviously you're going to have all the reconciliation. That's fine. That could be the start of day for the next day. And then things change. So we want to capture that. We created a fantastic automated, I say fantastic, I didn't create it, so I can talk about it. Our QAs, our automated QAs created a fantastic test framework for this one. And when the automated QA joined the project, the PM on the project had actually set a challenge because he wasn't sure of the value of that automated QA. And by the end of the first week, I remember the QA presented what he'd done and showed the dashboard, showed the tests firing off, From that moment on, he was almost one of the MVPs of the actual team, so the most valuable team player, because we could all see that the complexity of some of the aggregation and so on had to be correct based on the portfolios, and also the particular traders' authentication and authorization for those portfolios, and it was all encompassed in a very readable test description, and then you could see that it was actually being run against the code and passing. Or as we changed things, if it would break, we'd get that feedback very quickly. And really, this UX, I mentioned about the glowing changes on the UX, but there were many other useful things. So, for example, traders do have larger screens generally, or maybe multiple, but even with that, they want to make most of the real estate. So you don't want a lot of filters, for example, all over your screen. So we had a blade that would extend, Again, these aren't rocket science in themselves, but when you start to put these techniques together, you're really providing the trader with something that they haven't used before. So this was aimed at the top 10 kind of power users of the CTRM reporting. And the benefit, apart from obviously giving them the right intraday exposure values across their portfolios, helping their trading, but the other benefit was it took away a lot of the load from the CTRM. So that was one of the quickest wins seen by the solution. So again, simple things iterated on within short time frames and tested, and maybe sometimes, an aggregation wouldn't be quite right work, or wouldn't be quite the thing that the trader wanted, but they'd be quick to give us that feedback. So we took that feedback and iterated and redeployed. So again, really, I think that particular UI was a real such a night and day compared to the old one. I should grab some screen grabs it in and put them in the slide before and after. Okay, moving on to example 3. So this is abstracting from an ETRM. So obviously, again, ETRM was doing a fine job for this energy trader, but we were looking for a bit more flexibility and a bit of innovation around position transfer in this example. So we had a lot of non-market facing portfolios that we wanted to sort of hoover them all up, do some aggregation and put them into a prompt book in this example. But we wanted to enable flexibility in the future. So what we did was, again, integrate with the ETRM, but simply we'd use bog standard. This was actually Endure, I can let you know, but basically we integrated with Endure. We avoided customization, so they could keep on the standard pass, standard product, not increase their upgrade costs or implementation costs. And although the ETRM was running within premise, we actually used the cloud for this innovation layer to enable it to scale. So we could get faster to market, if you like, faster to use, and also enable it for future scaling as it needed to grow. So in this example, the real kind of innovation layer in this outer circle here was a sophisticated flexible rules engine, and it had a workflow. So I've got this person sat here or stood here looking at the screen, and basically they could actually set up rules to manipulate their portfolios in an organized manner and test it, and actually get sign off from the portfolio owners before it was then, say, had this admin owner responsibility. So again, this was acknowledging the fact that the traders were being remunerated based on the performance of the portfolios. So if they were, long or short against the market, they were actually either going to get penalized or, could take profit. This was a very politically sensitive area to be involved in. But again, because it was made very visible, simple UI, the admin user could set the rules up, test it, show the trader or the portfolio, the book owner, and say, do you agree with this? This is what's going to happen. Don't be surprised. And they could all agree. And they had the ability to put in default rules. So they say, if a new portfolio was created, but there hadn't been a specific rules created for that portfolio, that could be swept up in that default rule. So there was all kind of extra flexibility, but without touching that core legacy ETRM in this instance in the middle. Okay, so that brings us through our examples. So if there are any questions, please do ask. I think we're going to move on to questions anyway now. So shall I hand back the mic to Mark or Ian? Do you want to?
I'll take all of it and just ask some questions.
Great.
So first of all, Chris, you must have some feedback or questions for this because you've always got questions for me.
No, I do have a question actually.
Yeah, go on, fire away.
Apologies for the background noise, Stanley. Just a question on those two last slides with the legacy CTRM in the middle and then the legacy ETRM. What when you talk about APIs and connectivity, sort of insulating the customer from the legacy technology sitting in the middle, but how much sort of reusability do you have between those in different projects for, say, the API, building the APIs or building the connectivity out?
So we go back to, so good question, thank you. So I'd say that we used very standard REST APIs for example, this particular ETRM integration, but we used OpenLink, indoor integration tools and worked with, and what I would add is we also included the client tech team within the development, so they didn't sort of get a surprise at the end of it. So I would say that the approach is definitely replicatable within the client. The API itself, so it wasn't like a generic API, but it was a specific API, but the pattern was reused multiple times across various other data sets that the client used elsewhere as well. So we had some transfer pricing and so on. So, that same pattern was implemented. And also, quite importantly, the security. So we used, I think in this example, Azure AD for user permissions. And that was all reusable across the client's IT landscape. Does that answer your question on that one? I think for the CTRM, the API, again, the pattern was reusable. The CTRM API that we had running was specific in the way that it was querying a certain set of data. So obviously there was a much wider set of data available in the CTRM database, but we actually only needed a subset of that data. So it was specific to that use case. But then we aggregated and we basically enriched data external to the CTRM. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was interested, I suppose, partly in terms of if you had, there's obviously lots of people out there using Ender, there's obviously probably more reusability between different clients that might use Ender versus somebody that might use, I don't know, Triple Point or something else.
Yep.
I was just interested in how that worked. Was all.
Yeah. So I think Ian, from our perspective, I mean, obviously, when we've worked with a client, for example, the IP is theirs, but the patterns and the experience, I guess, is something you don't forget. So it's reusable from that point of view.
Yeah, I think it sort of, to play to that question, Chris, in theory, if you had Ender version X inside client one, then one could reuse the API on the Ender side. But two things, they all have different versions. And secondarily, what you're connecting it to on the outside of those rings may differ because some are Azure, some are Amazon, some are on-premise only. So the variation by client is enormous, as you know very well. So you've got to work within the estate of the client's existing systems. So there are some components one can bring to the party, but most useful, as Stephen said, is the knowledge and the patterns and the experience of having done it before, and apply that to the client's current or target architecture to get the outcome you want to. That's the way we tend to play it.
One thing, if I could add as well, and you made me remember something really important that I haven't mentioned, but I had wanted to. When I mentioned about the 5 patterns, we talked about, prepare, or rather architecting software for change. One aspect is when you create these REST-based APIs, for example, that means that you're not tied to a given language. So in this example, we had some Java-based REST APIs. So the API is coded in Java, but the endpoint could be accessed by any code of that language. So for example, in Python. Sorry, Mark, I'm just gonna, because Mark, can you, yep, that's right, waving in the background. Yeah, so the point being, so once you've got that REST API in place from the ETRM, whether you've written that in Java or C# doesn't matter, but the consuming service can just connect to that rest point. So that consuming service, in the example of the models, it was a Python model that would pull in the data. In the example of the position transfer, we actually used C#. So there were different languages used for different purposes based on the client's wishes, as well as, you know, the best tool for the right job. So again, by abstracting, you're giving yourself more choice in the technologies you use, and again, the right shape, the right tool for the right shape, not forcing a hammer as a screwdriver. That's a bad example. Hopefully that gives a bit more colour to that.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
I've got another couple of questions that come in. One was really about how do you manage, or how does this help you manage current volatility in market conditions? Maybe you or Mark could just comment on how this approach does help an organisation to do that.
I'm happy, Mark, if you want to, do you want to go first or after?
No, you go ahead, Steve.
So very briefly, so obviously I wouldn't advise a specific trading strategy because that isn't my specialty. But what I do think is, given the volatility, so, you know, how do you, if the volatility means that you're going to have to restructure your booking process or your books and so on in your portfolios, being able to do that more quickly is obviously going to be more beneficial. So I think, again, not thinking in terms of 6 to 12 month change cycles, but thinking in 2 to 4 week change cycles means that you're not hooked into the wrong model too long. So again, you know, learning, and that really does depend upon, and that's where automated testing is becoming more and more important in my mind, because when we make change to any software, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's legacy or current, you want to make sure that you're not going to regress, because regression risks are huge. And obviously, you know, when we're talking about trading and regulated solutions and environments and industries, we want to make sure that we can actually say, well, look, we've run a whole suite of tests, and, you know, what was working before is still working great, and now we've added on functionality, let's build out that safety net. And I think that's one of the key things. You want to be able to iterate quickly, safely. So I think, you know, particularly, and especially around security as well, let's not forget how important, you know, making sure your data is secure is essential. And some people may implement some, you know, hardware in AWS, not thinking about the security policies. And some of the policies are default to open. So you want to be very careful about that and, you know, head it off before it becomes a problem. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, I also, it's just having the flexibility to be able to make change quick within your organisation. You know, if market conditions you know, are rapidly changing, you want to be able to rapidly change the stuff that you've got underneath, and giving yourself a flexible architecture in this kind of manner is a great way of being able to do that. So it's for me, it's almost a fundamental.
And what I would add is, one of the examples around asset optimization was, one of the reasons why they needed to iterate more quickly and innovate was because of renewables and, you know, the different kind of shape to that power. So if you've got a nuclear power plant, you've got a, you know, 5-year plan, great, it's going to hum away in the background. Coal, you can start up within a few hours and have it up at various peaks of power, great, fantastic. But obviously with wind in particular, it's dependent upon the weather. Water and hydro and everything else have different profiles, and, you know, the industry is really getting to grips with it. So having the people who can model and forecast and predict, you know, all of these changes and how that influences, if you like, really shape and shape the dynamics of the market is really important. So again, that's, you know, increased volatility through renewables and basically new things. Anything new is going to give you, you know, more questions, I think. So you need to be able to respond.
Mark, question for you, I suppose, on this one. Having sat in the driving seat and at least 3 large organizations, in addition to helping other large organizations make certain transitions, sometimes integrating 2 organizations, how would an approach like this have helped you in Enron or EDFT or Shell, or any of the examples you can give us? What sort of problems would it help you overcome?
Well, obviously when we were at Enron, the technologies weren't there to do this kind of thing. But if we did have them, then I have no doubt that we would have been using these technologies or these ways of working or any other to effectively get speed to market. At Enron, that was always the thing. It was like, how can we get our ideas into the marketplace as quick as possible? And obviously Enron all went the wrong way, but the underlying technology and the stuff we built there didn't. But but yeah, it would be a really useful thing to have had then. Places like Shell, all the big companies now are beginning to move these ways, but they still have this legacy, and they still aren't able to move quick enough, because a lot of their internal teams just don't have the skill sets, or they're hampered by the internal procedures with regards to how they get approval for all these things to happen. So it's always a difficult kind of thing to make work within an organisation like that. However, if you have a forward-thinking management team that is looking at how your underlying architecture is working for the business, and you're actually looking to see what can we do for the business, then these kind of techniques are the things that I think are really useful and really helpful, and especially so because instead of, as I said right at the beginning, saying, well, look, okay, our ETRM no longer works for us, we need to completely throw that out and put a new one in, which is going to take us multiple years. This allows you to get certain pieces of it to the market and get in there for the things that are specifically needed at that time much quicker than if you do the previous, the big bang approach. So yeah, I think it's incredibly helpful, and I'd love to. I don't really do those sorts of things anymore. I'd love to have had these sorts of like techniques available at that point in those previous years.
Thank you. Very interesting. Alex, I know you're on the call, and I just wanted to ask, because you've sat in some of the sessions I've spoken on, and I've seen you speak as well. Have you got a sort of perspective you can add to this?
I mean, a lot of my perspective would just be about sort of you're concreting in legacy systems that don't work, basically. And I mean, the innovation that you put on top of this, does that mean it's even more difficult to take out the legacy system if you want to?
Good question.
I would say no. My quick answer would be, it's an interesting point. So obviously, if somebody's keen to get rid of an ETRM, that's fine. And in fact, there are some clients talk to us about changing ETRM or whatever. If it's not working for you, then of course you could just rip it up and go. But we're working with quite large, one of the largest power company or energy companies in the world. To move away from their ETRM would be a huge undertaking with massive risk. So this is why we use the word despite. So this is acknowledging that for some it's too big a leap to go completely away from maybe an ETRM, right? But let's minimize their sort of, to your point, if it's not working entirely, that's a different question. But if maybe customizing certainly might work for a short time, doesn't work longer term in my experience. But yeah, so I think that's two different questions. About whether or not you're locking yourself into that legacy, I believe not, because trades generally have very similar kind of attributes. And in fact, if you use fixed protocols or whatever like that, then you're not insulating yourself, but you're preparing for, you've already made yourself a generic interface that you could repoint if you wanted. But the interesting point, the layer, if you had an ETRM over here and you build an innovation layer, then suddenly change it to a ETRM, all you have to do is replicate the data, the content, maybe with some changes for that new ETRM to work with the new solution as well.
And is there a
point to explore?
I mean, there comes a point where, say, all the layers you might add to an ETRM and things, eventually it just doesn't work. I remember back in 2013 or so, and someone had automated, it was Endure, and they'd automated all the systems, all their middle office work, it was all done completely automated. But it had so many interfaces and it was so complex that it broke almost 50% of the time. They didn't actually get any productivity benefits because they still needed an entire middle office team to sit there and then correct all the mistakes that came out of it every day. So, and I guess they hadn't really thought that through properly. But yeah, it was interesting how sometimes that innovation, if you're not focusing on that problem and where it goes in step 2 and 3, can cause issues as well.
Yeah, I would come back to it's the quality of your people. I mean, as we said, I could jump onto AWS and architect something, right? But I know our architects and a number of our principals and seniors could do a lot better and not be in a mess. And mine might be a spaghetti heap of bits of interesting technology that I've put together. Sometimes I've seen examples of people really being interested to learn some technology, but not really thinking, is that the best technology for the solution? Does it fit the problem space? Sometimes it might be an over-engineered rules engine. In this case, we could have gone for an off-the-shelf, and in fact, we have iterated and tested out various rules engines, both for the asset optimization, also for the ETRM integration, and we went with a much simpler, much simpler solution to avoid getting into that sort of technology spaghetti, basically. Again, I think you have to have high quality, experienced people who have, cut their teeth on previous solutions. Otherwise, mess.
I suppose that's it's almost like a second stab at it. If they do say an innovation layer, and then they invest in the people on that innovation layer, that they can then get something out of that and start to get better results, perhaps.
Yeah. You mentioned data quality. That's a really important point. I remember, Ian, it's another case study, another talk, but there's a lot of questions around how do we improve data quality. So regardless of, obviously sometimes if you're booking the wrong trade, and in fact, some various clients, they book the wrong trade, and they say, when you extract it, you have a look at that trade, and they'll go, oh yeah, but that's actually, that's a swap, and this is the other leg, and you can get into all kinds. You got to really architect your data as well, and if there's a question mark about where you validate that, then you want the golden source to be the real source, not sort of 5 steps down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alex. And bear in mind that our job is to try and help clients solve significant problems that they encounter, and where they have an ETRM in place or a CTRM in place, they're not always going to rip and replace that, and others have made choices to move from system A to system B, their choice, and they're trying to make sure the system B doesn't suffer from some of the shortcomings of system A. So this architecture and approach allows you to choose a system B as, if you like, a vanilla system, and then build out the functionality anew that might have been embedded in customizations in system A. So we're not there necessarily to direct their architecture, although we'll help on that. Sometimes they want to do that. Others, as you know, have got multiple ETRMs, and there's no way they're getting off all of them soon. So we can build an architecture that is sympathetic to the existing ETRM landscape, and it's often helped them to migrate from, we've seen as many as 11 in one organization, down to 1 or 2 or 3 as they desire.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Did you have any other questions, Alex?
No. I was just keen to come and listen to some of the stories about what you guys have been doing. That's all.
Thank you. All right. Well, I got one last question, which was about requirements of resilience in DR take more priority than a nice UX. I think, Stephen, again, maybe you want to answer that question from the viewpoint of, in a sense, how does it help address all of those points? The UX is an important part, as Jobs has kind of showed us, but how does this support resilience in DR?
Yeah. I mean, I would argue, my opinion is that it isn't an either or. You don't just build a UX and throw all of your data up there. When we built the CTRM intraday reporting, it had to only show a given trader the trades to which it was he or she was permissioned to see. So we build. I mean, you've got to build security and right in from the start. So it's not an either or. I think with anything, I mean, if I was talking about a book of work, so the way that I would see it over time is you should monitor, how many, if you like, stories, call them user stories because we're talking in an agile form, but whatever requirements. Are you only kicking out features, in which case you're just a feature factory, you're just spitting out sausages or whatever it might be. What you need to look at is over time, are you doing enough refactoring? Because that will improve the code, maintainability and so on. Are you including defects? Are you keeping up with your technical debt? So really, you need to look at a whole band of things. And if you were only kicking features out and you never implemented maybe, a security feature or authorization or whatever it may be, again, you've got to make sure that you're aware of the breadth of the solution. And sometimes, it's not just getting a feature, it's also performance testing. So there's a wider responsibility, I think, to look at. So I don't see it as an either or. Good,
thank you, Stephen. It's useful. And one other question I think I had here was an interesting one about test automation. So what would you, as part of this, and coming back to your point, Alex, about you've seen organizations build it, do lots of connectivity, and then find it still breaks. I assume test automation is a part of making sure that doesn't happen. So Stephen, do you want to comment on that point as well?
Yeah, so I mean, so test automation absolutely essential, and as we know, so any developer worth their salt would, when you talk about requirement, one of the first questions is so you know, what are the acceptance criteria? How will I know when it's going to be done? So they should be using that knowledge to build their unit tests. So one client was unfortunately in a position where they were under some pressure, and they were suggesting that unit tests be skipped because we could do it later. And I had to say, well, with respect, don't think that's a good idea, because you don't actually know that some code works unless you've got the unit test. So it's part of development. Don't see it as separate, see it as one whole. That's number one. On top of that, yeah, building out automated integration tests and so on. There's a lovely diagram, I'm sure we've all seen it, test pyramid. So the unit tests are the most numerous, simple, independent tests to run, then build automated integration tests. That means the user has fewer, more expensive tests to run at the end of the process, and maybe some sense checking, but everything else, if you automate, you really are giving yourself, you're investing in a future of less pain.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. Well, I'm just conscious of time, so unless there's any final questions, we'll wrap up now. Anything for anyone else? No? Well, thank you very much for joining us and for your questions. Really appreciate it. If you want to know anything more about it, do feel free to reach out either to myself or Mark or Stephen. Love to chat further. Thanks for your time. Have a very good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.